Hello and welcome. The DC imprint, Vertigo Comics, published some of the best comics for a mature, mainstream audience. Originally, it began as a place to publish quirky material that didn't fit their usual superhero lineup. It evolved over time to include a wide variety of material, usually with a supernatural edge. Unfortunately, in 2020, after a decade of low-profile, often overlooked series, the imprint was officially shuttered in favor of Black Label. Recently, it was announced that Vertigo would return, although details at this time are unclear. Regardless, it's a good time to look back at Vertigo and select a number of interesting titles published under that imprint. Vertigo has its own Hall of Fame. These were titles that put specific creators in the spotlight and became classic additions to the Vertigo imprint. There's Sandman, Preacher, Transmetropolitan, 100 Bullets, Doom Patrol, and Shade the Changing Man. The Hall of Fame would also include Hellblazer. Although unlike the majority of Vertigo's titles, which usually had one creative team, Hellblazer was worked on by many different hands throughout its lifetime. These Hall of Famers are worth a brief acknowledgement, and generally speaking, most would likely populate a top 10 list of best Vertigo titles. That said, I'm going to focus on lesser-known works. And like all of these reading list videos, I'm going to select a number of different flavors. Of all the Sandman spin-offs, Lucifer is the rare series that matches the original for depth of mythology, creativity, and a solid overall story. The first miniseries, and the first story arc, is the writer, Mike Carey, doing his best to appeal to Neil Gaiman's audience, which gives the series a bit of an awkward start. But shortly afterwards, Carey finds his own voice, and the series erupts to life. Lucifer is about the one thing every human being can identify with: freedom. And ultimately, full control of their destiny. For Lucifer, living within a universe created by God, who has an ultimate vision for everyone and everything, Lucifer cannot state that his apparent unlimited freedom is not an illusion. Lucifer's goal is to escape this universe, create his own, and live in a space where he exists without any sense of obligation. It's a simple plan with many complications and forces who actively work against him. However, Lucifer is singular in focus and never wavers from that goal. The most compelling character beat is that Lucifer doesn't lie. He most certainly uses people for his own purposes, but he is forthright with them. It's a very nuanced portrayal of a proud, arrogant man with a bad reputation, who cares very little about how he's perceived by others. From what I understand, Fables was originally planned to end at issue 75. However, it ended up doubling that issue count, and then it returned for another brief run in 2022. Although, due to a recent falling out between the writer, Bill Willingham, and the publisher, DC, it looks like Fables is now officially over. This is worth mentioning because the series has a very satisfying conclusion in the 75th issue. In my opinion, everything after that is fine, but kind of unnecessary. I wouldn't say the quality dropped, but the underlying mystery and the issue of exile was resolved. A lot of intrigue and tension dissipated afterwards, and the new challenge that arises never really becomes as interesting or unique as the previous one. Regardless, the first half of the run is rather compelling and well done, using familiar and obscure fairy tale characters living their lives in modern times. Part of the appeal is how these characters are more than archetypes for old morality plays. Another part is how they all came together and created a distinct, hidden society in this world. Thematically, one could say these characters represent how those old morals have changed throughout the centuries and how they manifest in society today. But the series doesn't call for a deeper interpretation. It's simply a solid story with a very solid conclusion halfway through. The core of The Losers is quite easy to explain. It's a caper, it's a heist movie, and for the most part, it seems quite plausible. It's centered around a military team attempting to clear their name following a failed mission. They go underground, investigate the forces conspiring against them, and then they strike back. Eventually, they discover the person that set them up and who is controlling everything from the shadows. There are a lot of moving parts, and they're all quite cohesive. There's a fast-paced, high-tension flow that is expertly managed. And in the middle of all this chaos, all the characters are given room to breathe and develop. Like a good action movie, it gently pushes against one's suspension of disbelief, but not to the point where it breaks. Despite the ending feeling abrupt, it was a conclusion that was planned, and it wasn't the result of a sudden cancellation. It may feel a bit engineered and ridiculous, but that does give it an overall action movie feel. The main focus of Young Liars is to explore the complicated relationship between the protagonist, Danny, and the object of his desire, Sadie. It's creepy and codependent, and always self-destructive. The various narratives explore the nature of Danny's obsession with Sadie, and how that obsession always has a fatal conclusion for at least one of them. It's a relationship that isn't remotely romantic. It's based on the need to share or to force one's suffering onto another. And when a situation is at its worst, that's the point when these two people are the closest to one another. Ultimately, the series is a surreal rock and roll fable. It's a fable because it's a story that contains truth, but it isn't true. And it's rock and roll because it travels at 1,000 miles an hour. And because, like most rock songs, it's about love. Sure, it's a distorted version of love, but it's love nonetheless. Unfortunately, the ending is bizarre and very impressionistic. It works on one level, but it would have worked a lot better if it hadn't been cancelled, forcing the creator to quickly piece something together. Why the Last Man is one of the final breakout titles from Vertigo. In Hollywood, it's known as a high-concept pitch, about an apocalyptic event that kills all men on Earth except one. It's also a road movie, where the protagonist and his companions travel across America and then the world, looking for the reason all men were wiped out. It's a perfect TV show pitch, which it became for exactly one short season. It quietly came and went during a time when there was an actual worldwide pandemic. Even though low ratings were cited as the reason it was cancelled, it's more likely no one wanted to continue making a show about a plague during a time when a real plague was taking place. That's a bit of a downer. Like a lot of apocalyptic fiction, it's a reflection of society during the time it was published. As a result, there are a lot of statistics thrown out to illustrate how women have been historically subjugated and abused by men. Then, when left to their own devices, women can manage just fine on their own. Except for the fact that humankind will eventually go extinct unless there's a viable way for women to reproduce on their own. So it gets a little preachy at times, but not to the point where it feels condescending. It's a reasonably organic chain of events that eventually reveals the cause of the premise. Well, there are a few explanations, and the writer, Brian K. Vaughan, hasn't specified which version is the one he had in mind as the actual explanation. So it's about the journey, specifically the lead character becoming a man, rather than discovering what's at the end of the rainbow. American Virgin by Stephen T. Siegel and Becky Cloonan is one of the oddest titles published by Vertigo. It's about a religious man dedicated to remaining pure until he's married. He travels America, getting young people to sign pledge cards to proclaim their own dedication to remaining chaste. Along with this purity pledge, he believes he was told by a higher power that he would dedicate himself to only one woman. This is a covenant, so to speak, that he makes with God. The twist that occurs is the woman is murdered before they can get married and consummate their relationship, so the character is seemingly doomed to remain a virgin. Unfortunately, there are a few well-intentioned trans characters that are regularly misgendered. It's something that stands out in these modern times. Again, they are intended to be well-rounded, positive representations, but the improper pronouns do undermine that intent. It's something that stands out and needed to be mentioned up front. That issue aside, one of the strengths of the series is it's played straight. The lead character isn't a laughable representation of a bizarre religious movement. He may be somewhat delusional, as those who claim to speak to a higher power may very well be, but he isn't irrational. Nor are his beliefs and motivations hard to understand. His devotion to the cause is believable, even if it's something one personally disagrees with. It's a premise that could have easily been played as a cheap critique of organized religion and some of the ridiculous policies that emerge. Instead, it's more nuanced, and not a platform to point and laugh at something that is pretty easy to ridicule. The writer, Mike Carey, makes the list again. Along with the artist, Peter Gross, The Unwritten explores the line between reality and fiction and the importance of both to one another. That's a terrible explanation that I'll probably regret, because this is a series that isn't easily summarized in a quick review format. It's the best I can do without spiraling down a rabbit hole of interpreting the series. The story revolves around Tom Taylor, the son of a writer, who wrote a series of magical young adult novels, using Tom as the foundation for the lead character, Tommy Taylor, Boy Wizard. Yes, it's clearly a Harry Potter or Timothy Hunter allusion. The overall mystery is discovering Tom's origin. Like Pinocchio, one is constantly questioning whether Tom is real, or whether he's someone fictional that became real. As another layer, there's the fact that, as a reader, we're reading a fictional story about a fictional character struggling with identity and reality, and how both may be manufactured. As a reader, we know this isn't real, but when a story is written well, it feels real, even though we subconsciously know it's all made up. So whether we're aware of it or not, our perception of the story is part of that story. Like I said a moment ago, it's a damn rabbit hole of interpretation. Anyway, as pretentious as the subtext may sound, it's a solid, straightforward story that's very easy to comprehend. It moves along at a pretty good pace, and it respects the reader's ability to get the odd concepts being explored. There's also a lot of respect for fiction itself and the power it contains. American Vampire, which was kind of created by Stephen King, is fully realized and expanded upon by Scott Snyder. It's mainly about two characters, Skinner Sweet and Pearl Jones, both of whom are a new breed of vampire with different characteristics than classic vampires. Additionally, one could say they have different values than traditional vampires. So it gently contrasts European culture with emerging American culture and New World attitudes against ancient traditions. The original series ran for 34 issues, and then it became a series of limited series, before getting a soft conclusion in 2020 under the Black Label imprint. Honestly, it's just a solid century-spanning story, with Snyder putting in some good early work. If vampire stories are your thing, I think this will satisfy that craving. There you go, 8 lesser-known selections, and the reason they're worth a read. I'm going to wrap this up for now by mentioning my Patreon and asking you to please support this channel. With it being the holiday season, if you're in the giving mood, the GoFundMe page is still open and accepting donations. Anything received goes towards getting equipment for this channel. Alright, that's enough. Let's end this. Thank you for watching. Thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Your ongoing support makes it possible for this channel to continue. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so very, very much. Extra special thanks to Eidolon, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sickin, Francis De La Cruz, Chris Malloy, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, L.S. Gregor, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Until next time.